Stephanie with AmericanMuscle.com, here with my review of the Roush Cold Air Intake Kit available for the 2015 and up Mustang GT. The Roush Cold Air Kit is going to be for the S550 GT owners out there who are looking to have a little bit of flexibility with their cold air intake. A cold air intake is normally one of the first mods that many Mustang owners go to, but a lot of times the question of is a tune required has an impact on the intake that is chosen. This intake from Roush has a Venturi tube that's going to change the math for, thereby giving the option of needing a tune or not, depending on the setup that you have chosen to run, either Venturi tube installed or not, which makes it unique. Now gains are going to change depending on the mass airflow or math board that you've chosen to run, but speaking of gains, let's see what kind of gains you can expect before we get any more into the intake. We already got a baseline run today from our 2015 GT, so we are now going to spin the car again with a Roush intake installed with no Venturi insert, so the 105mm math bore, and a 93 octane tune, because if you're not going to run the insert, you definitely need to run a tune. Our baseline run with our 2015 GT gave us numbers of 395 horsepower and 361 foot-pounds of torque at the rear wheels. With the Roush intake and tune installed, those numbers changed to 411 horsepower and 387 foot-pounds of torque, making for a peak gain of 16 horsepower and 26 foot-pounds of torque. Now keep in mind that we did pair the intake with a tune, so a lot of these gains can definitely be attributed to that tune. Our gains throughout the curve showed as much as 28 horsepower and 28 foot-pounds of torque right in the 5,000 to 5,500 RPM range. These are the gains that you're actually going to notice when you're driving, especially in this RPM range. Now we did run the car with the Venturi tube installed just to see what kind of gains we can expect on the 85mm mass airflow. We did pair it with a tune because even though you don't necessarily need one if you're running the insert, we know that we're going to see the best performance and the most gains when we do pair a cold air intake with a tune. A cold air intake alone without a tune isn't going to net large gains, probably somewhere in the single digits when it comes to horsepower gains, but what we ended up seeing here was about 5 horsepower and 15 foot-pounds less of torque with the insert in and the same tune installed. But this is still going to be a good option for those who are not quite ready to step up to a tune yet. Let's look a little bit more at the intake itself. The first thing I noticed was that the filter was actually pretty large and bigger than some of the other filters that are out there on other cold air intakes that I have seen. It is a reusable, high-flow, dry air filter, which is nice because when it gets dirty, you can clean it and reinstall it and not have to worry about the oiling process or getting oil on your math. The intake also fits nicely, and I think it looks better under the hood than the stock airbox does for sure. Another cool thing here is that the airbox does still keep the air feed from the grille, which actually brings in air from outside the car. This is nice to see from an open airbox because it does bring in the cooler air from outside the engine compartment. I like that they have tapped into that factory cold air duct here. The other thing you will notice here is that the Roush intake does eliminate the sound tube that the factory intake has. This leads to the most difficult part of the install, which I'll talk about more in a minute, but just a heads up that Roush gives this little plug to plug up the firewall right behind the head so you won't have a hole where the sound tube enters the cabin. So talking a little bit more about the Venturi tube here. This is the Venturi tube here, and basically what it's going to do is change the math bore of the intake. With the tube installed, the math bore will be 85mm, which will not require a computer retune. A lot of the computer retune is based on the math size with these aftermarket intakes. Now that's not to say that you can't run a tune with the tube installed, as you saw earlier. Without the Venturi tube installed, the mass airflow size is obviously going to be much larger, 105mm to be exact, which will definitely require a tune. So just to go over this one more time, if you run the Venturi tube, you don't necessarily need a tune, but if you don't run the tube, then you do need a tune for sure. And that is how Roush is offering an intake that gives you the option of running a tune or not, depending on how you set it up. Looking at the price for this intake, it costs right in between $300 and $400, being slightly closer to that $400 mark, which is right in line with other intakes like Air8 and JLT. When it comes to the install, it's nothing too difficult, and all you really need is a few sockets and a flat head for the plastic pins. The most difficult part, like I mentioned earlier, is taking out that stock sound tube because there are parts of it that can be hard to get to. Roush does say to take out the entire sound tube and plug the firewall, but there could be a way to get around removing the entire sound tube if it seems like too much trouble for you, or if you want to be able to easily revert back to a stock setup. You can find a plug out there to plug the second half of the sound tube so you don't have to completely remove it, just as a little tip. I'm still going to call this a 1 out of 3 wrenches on the scale, and it should take you about an hour to complete the install. Wrapping things up here, this intake from Roush is a good quality option that fits and looks great and gives the user an option as far as which mass airflow size they'd like to run. If you run the Venturi tube, you don't need a tune, but if you want to run the larger MAP size, then you will need a tune. The intake when paired with the tune is certainly going to increase power and improve the drivability of the S550 GT, and you can check it out more for yourself online right here at AmericanMuscle.com.